Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise, really, and help you get genuinely well-informed on some of the world's most complex topics. And today, we are diving deep into one that is, well, undeniably intricate, often overwhelming, actually, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Our mission really is to unearth key insights, maybe some surprising facts, crucial contexts, basically to give you a level of clarity you might not find elsewhere. Okay, so let's unpack this. For today's deep dive, we've gathered quite a stack of sources. We've got extensive articles, research from Wikipedia covering the Fatah-Hamas conflict, Israeli settlements, international reactions to the recent Gaza war, the broader conflict itself, and we've also got an insightful piece from Al Jazeera on the growing number of countries recognizing Palestine.
Exactly. And these sources, they give us a really rich tapestry to work with. The goal is to connect the dots for you, guide you from the conflict's historical origins right up to its current global ramifications. We want to offer a thorough but still, highly digestible understanding of this very layered situation. Maybe provide some aha moments.
Right. Because to really understand today, we have to start by setting that historical stage. This isn't new. Its roots stretch way back, late 19th, early 20th centuries. That's when you see the rise of Zionism in Europe, this multifaceted movement, really, about Jewish self-determination, the desire for a homeland, often through a state in Palestine. And this coincided with the first significant wave of Jewish settlers arriving in Ottoman Palestine back in 1882. Then things really shifted in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, Britain promising support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. After World War I, Britain takes over, establishes mandatory Palestine, and this period sees more Jewish immigration, which you can imagine significantly fueled tensions between the communities. And that eventually boiled over into the 1936-1939 Arab Revolt, a fierce demand for independence, but ultimately suppressed by the British.
And that brings us to the post-World War II era, a really pivotal moment. In 1947, the UN steps in with Resolution 181, the Partition Plan. It proposed dividing Palestine into Arab and Jewish states, with Jerusalem having a special international status. What's critical here, though, is the reaction. Palestinian Arabs overwhelmingly opposed it. They saw it as, well, dispossession, while Zionist leaders accepted the plan, although sources do indicate they intended to expand beyond those UN borders. And this immediately ignited the 1948 Palestine War, a conflict that fundamentally changed the region, redrew the map, displaced huge numbers of people. In its wake, over half the Palestinian Arab population became refugees, fleeing or expelled by Israeli forces. It's an event known to Palestinians as the Nakba, the catastrophe. It defines so much of the ongoing displacement crisis. By the war's end, Israel was established on most of the former mandate's land. Gaza came under Egyptian control, the West Bank under Jordanian control.
And then a really central, transformative moment shaping the modern conflict, the 1967 Six-Day War. This resulted in Israel occupying both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, territories that really the international community largely still considers occupied Palestinian territory today. That single event dramatically expanded Israel's control and, well, set the stage for so much what we see now. Okay, so with that critical historical backdrop in place, it's vital to see that the Palestinian struggle isn't monolithic. It's not just one story. Just as external pressures shape their destiny, deep internal divisions have also profoundly influenced things, particularly the Fatah-Hamas conflict. This internal struggle, it really kicked off around 2006. The main phase was 2007, when Hamas took over Gaza, effectively creating two separate Palestinian political entities. And it's not just history, it's ongoing. Despite attempts at reconciliation, new political crises kept emerging. Big tensions resurfaced in 2012 and again in 2013. It just highlights these persistent challenges to unity.
Yeah, and a crucial detail from our sources is the significant involvement of external powers in this internal fight. After Hamas formed its own force in 2006, the U.S., Israel, Egypt, Jordan, they all played a role in training and equipping Mahmoud Abbas's presidential guard. The U.S., for instance, provided substantial backing, tens of millions of dollars for training, non-lethal gear. And we also find this perspective from Anwar Zaboon, a Hamas council member. He believed Mohammed Dahlan had this big plan to remove the roots of Hamas everywhere. And then there's a striking current development noted in the sources. Israel apparently started arming Fatah militants in 2025, specifically to weaken Hamas in Gaza. So, zooming out, you see how even internal Palestinian dynamics are just deeply intertwined with external influence and, frankly, strategic manipulation.
Right, and we can't overlook the ripple effects from the region either. Like when Egyptian President Morsi was deposed in July 2013, Egypt's new regime, backed by the U.S., kept the Rafah crossing mostly closed. That's Gaza's lifeline. It stayed that way until forces loyal to Mahmoud Abbas regained control.
A Hamas official actually accused the PA leadership of enforcing that closure. It just shows how regional politics directly hit humanitarian and political realities for Palestinians on the ground.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Let's talk about Israeli settlements, a core, often deeply controversial part of this conflict. Their origins go back to the 1970s. Israel started requisitioning Palestinian land, sometimes, reportedly, even using methods like poison spray, ostensibly for military purposes initially. But the Likud government, from 77 onwards, really intensified settlement building. Ariel Sharon, that same year, declared this ambitious plan, settled 2 million Jews in the West Bank by 2000. And this was formalized by the Drobles Plan in 78 and 80, a framework for large-scale settlement, the clear strategic goal: prevent a Palestinian state, create facts on the ground, as they called it, geographically isolate Palestinian communities.
And the physical reality today is quite stark. They're entirely in Area C of the West Bank. That's about 60% of the territory. Now, why Area C matters is that's where Israel has full security and administrative control, which effectively stops Palestinian development and fragments any potential future state. The actual buildings cover maybe only 1% of the West Bank, but their jurisdiction. While, according to Beit Silem, it extends to about 42% of the territory. The Yishuv Council, the Settler Council, claims a smaller figure, 9.2%. But the real insight here isn't just the footprint, it's the control. These settlements are strategically placed to fragment the land, making a viable contiguous Palestinian state almost impossible. It's less about housing, more about borders, which raises the huge question of legality. And this is a major international debate. The widespread view, UN, International Court of Justice, including its 2024 ruling, most countries, legal experts, is that they're illegal under international law, a war crime under the Fourth Geneva Convention. But there's a counter-argument. Israel often argues the territories were seized in self-defense, and the Geneva Convention, which covers occupied territories, might not apply to what they call disputed territory, this fundamental disagreement. It underpins so much of the international friction.
So what does this actually mean for the Palestinians living there? I mean, what are the impacts on the ground? They're profound, wide-ranging. Economically, the settlements often function as separate systems. They confiscate land, use a disproportionate amount of resources like water, and they can deny work opportunities, further squeezing the Palestinian economy.
And looking at labor law, there were big disparities for a long time. Until a 2007's Israeli Supreme Court ruling, Palestinians working in settlements fell under Jordanian labor law. No basic protections like minimum wage, overtime. The court ruled Israeli labor law should apply, but it highlighted just how unequal the previous system was. Then there's the very serious issue of violence, both ways. Israeli settler violence is well documented, acts deemed terrorism by the U.S. State Department, terror by a former IDF head. We've seen shocking examples, like the Gush Emunim underground Baruch Goldstein's 1994 massacre, but it's also crucial to acknowledge Palestinian violence against settlers. Some armed groups have controversially called settlers legitimate targets, a claim flatly rejected by groups like Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem, based on the absolute ban on targeting civilians.
And the expansion hasn't stopped. March 2024, right in the middle of the Gaza war, Israel announced plans for over 3,300 new settlement homes. That was reportedly in response to a Palestinian attack, and it drew immediate criticism from the U.S., showing that ongoing international concern. So against this really complex, often volatile backdrop, what about peace? Let's look at the attempts to find a path forward. What do the sources tell us about trying to resolve this? And why did those efforts ultimately seem to unravel? By the late 70s, the PLO started a major shift, moving towards the idea of a two-state solution. This culminated in Yasser Arafat's historic 1993 letter recognizing Israel's right to exist. Though it's important to note Israel wasn't required to and didn't recognize the Palestinian state's right to exist then.
Right. And the Oslo Accords, 93 and 95, were undeniably a huge milestone, generated massive global hope. They set up a framework for negotiations, but and this is key. They left the really tough issues, borders, Jerusalem, refugees, for final status talks down the road. This drew a lot of criticism. Many felt it didn't uphold Palestinian self-determination or statehood. Some argue it basically repealed the standard interpretation of UN Resolution 242 that land can't be acquired by war by letting Israel keep control of territories occupied in 1967. Noam Chomsky famously assessed that Oslo essentially let Israel do virtually what it likes. And zooming out a bit, Oslo also led to the creation of the Palestinian Authority, the PA, and it set up security cooperation, which has often been described as, well, outsourcing the occupation to the PA. Yitzhak Rabin, Israel's prime minister then, explicitly said he expected Palestinians would be better at establishing internal security because they allow no appeals to the Supreme Court. That reveals a pretty specific vision for the PA's role.
But unfortunately, that initial promise started to unravel. We saw Rabin's assassination in '95, a huge blow. Then the failures at Camp David in 2000, Tauba 2001, and a telling sign of the underlying trends. Even during Ehud Barak's short time as prime minister, settlements actually grew by 10%.
By December 2000, you had the Clinton parameters, a sort of last-ditch effort. They proposed a sovereign Palestinian state, Gaza, 94-96% of the West Bank, plus land swaps. Jerusalem divided, Arab areas Palestinian, Jewish areas Israeli. Both sides accepted these parameters with reservations as a basis for more talks. But ultimately, the negotiations just halted, core issues unresolved.
And today, Israeli policy seems to have shifted. Less focus on a negotiated solution, more on managing the conflict. This, plus the ongoing settlement expansion, has led many Palestinians to believe Israel isn't really committed to a two-state deal. Maybe it never was. The scale of this recent conflict, the Gaza war starting late 2023, has just sent massive shockwaves globally, no doubt about it. From your analysis, what really stood out? What were the most significant, maybe surprising, international reactions, beyond just the initial condemnations?
We saw a really varied, often quite fractured global response. It wasn't uniform at all. On one side, you had countries like Argentina, Canada initially, Poland, Ukraine. They condemned Hamas's attacks as brutal terrorist attacks, strongly supported Israel's right to self-defense. Then others, like Brazil and Chile, took a more balanced stance, calling for de-escalation, a two-state solution, while still condemning the attacks. But then a substantial number of nations were explicitly critical of Israel's actions, often citing international law. Belize terminated diplomatic ties, Bolivia cut ties over crimes against humanity, and notably voted against condemning Hamas. Colombia severed relations in May 2024. Their president even compared the IDF to Nazi Germany. Norway and Turkey said Israel's actions violated international law. Turkey's President Erdogan refused to call Hamas terrorist, labeled Israel's response a massacre. Spain took a particularly strong line. The deputy PM called for denouncing Israel for planned genocide. PM Sanchez urged an immediate ceasefire, promised to work towards recognizing Palestine. Spain and Ireland even sent a joint letter to the EU Commission about Israel's human rights compliance in their trade deal. And Spain asked to join South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ in June 2024. Russia's position was complex. Condolences for Israelis, yes, but also called the conflict a clear example of the failure of U.S. policy. Affirmed Israel's right to defend itself, but also said the Gaza bombardment broke international law. And they hosted a Hamas delegation.
And beyond governments, what about broader society? What impacts did we see there? Economically, for instance, those boycotts of Western companies, Starbucks, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and some Muslim countries, reflecting real anger at perceived Western support for Israel.
Yeah, and that extended to direct action, too. Protests, blockades at arms factories supplying Israel, like Lockheed Martin BAE Systems. And it's worth noting the scale of military aid. The U.S. proposed $14.3 billion in emergency aid to Israel, bypassed Congress multiple times for arms sales, thousands of bombs, artillery shells. Other big arms suppliers include the UK, Germany, France.
And just logistically, those widespread flight cancellations to Tel Aviv by so many major airlines, a huge disruption.
Culturally in sports, too, you felt the reactions keenly. The English FA honored victims on both sides, but banned the phrase "from the river to the sea." Celtic FC got fined by UEFA for fans displaying a PFLP flag, that's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And players like Youssef Attal, Anwar El-Ghazi faced suspensions over social media posts. It shows the personal impact.
So pulling this together, what are the key takeaways from these reactions? What do they tell us about the global landscape, maybe shifting public opinion?
Well, it really highlights this crucial trend, especially in public opinion. You see it in poll data. In the U.S., for example, a clear generational divide. Millennials, Gen Z, showing significantly less support for Israel. One poll found a notable percentage thought the October 7th attack was justified by Palestinian grievances. Some were more likely to see Hamas as freedom fighters. TikTok, social media, they've been widely credited with influencing younger people. There was even this observed trend of Gen Z users converting to Islam, maybe as a form of rebellion against Western values. Ultimately, this conflict has undeniably exposed a deepening global divide between Israel and its traditional Western allies on one side and the global South on the other.
Okay, let's pivot now to a really significant diplomatic development that's ongoing. It's quite striking. As of today, 147 countries, that's 75% of UN members plus the Holy See, formally recognize the state of Palestine. That's a powerful statement.
Absolutely. And to trace that momentum briefly, it gained real force after Yasser Arafat proclaimed an independent state back in 1988. After that, over 80 countries, mostly from the global south, quickly extended recognition. Then key milestones followed. Palestine's upgrade to non-member observer state at the UN General Assembly in 2012, that was big. And then Sweden in 2014 becoming the first Western European country to recognize Palestine. That signaled a potential shift in a traditionally more hesitant bloc.
And we've seen a real surge recently, haven't we? Norway, Ireland, Spain. They formally recognized Palestine just on May 23, 2024, specifically citing pre-1967 borders, East Jerusalem as the capital. It felt like a coordinated diplomatic push. And looking ahead, French President Macron announced in April 2025 that France plans to recognize Palestine within months, maybe at a UN conference in June 2025. The Palestinian Authority welcomed that as a step in the right direction. You get a sense of a potential cascade effect in Europe.
Exactly. And zooming out, what does this growing recognition mean? Well, it's multifaceted. It definitely strengthens Palestine's global standing. It potentially enhances its ability to hold Israeli authorities accountable, for the occupation. And it puts increasing pressure on Western powers to actually act on the two-state solution they often talk about. Though it's particularly noteworthy that none of the G7 countries, the major industrial democracies, currently recognize Palestine. That highlights a key diplomatic fault line right now.
So, wrapping this up, what does it all mean? We've really tried to delve into this intricate tapestry. The deep historical roots, the complex internal Palestinian dynamics, the profound impact of settlements, the varied international reactions. It's not just history, it's living, evolving with global consequences.
Right. And ultimately, understanding this conflict means acknowledging multiple perspectives, often competing ones. And all the interconnected layers, historical, political, human rights, international law, there's no single narrative that captures the whole scope. Embracing that complexity is just crucial.
So, considering everything we've discussed, the diverse international reactions, those shifting public opinions, the growing momentum for Palestine's recognition, here's a final thought for you to consider. What do you believe is the single most critical factor that could genuinely alter the trajectory of this conflict moving forward?